You're listening to the Raising Family Podcast with your hosts, David Steele and Linda Hill. Brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org.
Hello and welcome to the Raising Family Podcast. I'm your host, David Steele, along with co-host Linda Hill. And today we are super excited and grateful to have Michelle and Steve Pollard. So we're working on paragraph 7. It's a really long paragraph. It's got a lot of amazing things. We're going to specifically talk about the latter end of the paragraph. So I'm just going to read that section, and then we'll give some time to Michelle and Steve to kind of talk about themselves. So this is the last part of paragraph 7, and it says, by divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness, and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. In these sacred responsibilities, fathers and mothers are obligated to help one another as equal partners. Disability, death, or other circumstances may necessitate individual adaptation. Extended families should lend support when needed. So we're really excited to talk about this, and we know you have some great stuff to say about it. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourselves and your family and what you guys do, and then we'll jump right in.
Go for it.
Okay, I guess I'll begin. So we're Michelle and Steve Pollard. We are originally from Melbourne, Australia, and we are both, we've both been members of the church all of our lives. And we have 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. They range from 26 years of age down to 17. And almost 2 years ago, I arrived here in Utah with the 2 boys who are now 19 and 17. And I don't know, we're kind of like pioneers. We felt very strongly that we needed to be here, and we didn't know all the reasons why. We just knew that there were lots of opportunities for our boys and also for us. Some of the reasons are clear now, but there are still many that aren't. It was certainly not an easy road to get here. It was quite a long road, and the path was definitely not clear. For most of the time, it really was just faith in every footstep. And there were times when we thought, oh, maybe this isn't meant to be. It's just too hard. And then I kind of had a light bulb moment one time, and I realized, hang on a minute, the pioneers, when they trudged across the mountains and when they made their way here into the Utah Valley, it was not easy. And I don't think for 1 minute they ever thought that that wasn't the right thing to do. And so I very much took that on and felt, okay, this is hard, really difficult. We couldn't see the whole way through. And even now there are parts of our journey that we just can't see in its entirety. But I just felt that just like the pioneers, just because it had been hard, it didn't mean it was meant to be. And in fact, it was just a continuation of that trial of faith, and just to see, how much were we prepared to follow the really strong promptings that we had. And so it has been a difficult journey, but the best journey. It's been the best thing so far for our 2 boys and for myself. And now we finally, and this is part of the stories, we finally have my husband here, Steve, because the boys and I traveled here by ourselves, knowing that Steve would be 3 to 6 months behind us. Unfortunately, that was how things had to be. We had things we needed to tie up in Australia, and Steve needed to do that. And so we arrived with just the suitcases. We left everything back home and knew that the boys were going to school, and knew that Steve was a little bit behind. And then, of course, it took longer to tie those things up than we expected, and it was a good 6 months before we saw Steve again. And he was able to spend that Christmas, so it was Christmas of 2019 with us. At that point when we saw him, we hadn't seen him for almost 6 months. And we decided then that was far too long and we couldn't let that happen again. And so the plan was for him to come back in April and hopefully to be here for good with us. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And COVID-19 meant that everything shut down. Australia very much shut down and is still very much shut down. And so we had no idea. Sorry. We had no idea when he would be able to join us. And we then spent another 16, 17 months without him. And he's only been here in the country with us now for about 7 weeks. And so that was a long road. But not for 1 second did I think it was time to pack up and go home and stop and give up on the journey. We still really knew that this was the right thing to do. And we were so fortunate to have so many experiences that reaffirmed that. It wasn't just a one-time thing where we thought, yeah, this is where Heavenly Father wants us. Time and time and time again, we had experiences where that was reaffirmed and confirmed. And we saw many miracles along the way. Many things that shouldn't have happened in our favor did, which would take hours to go into and explain. But so many things just fell into place at the last minute that were probably humanly not possible, but did happen. So, yeah, it's pretty incredible. Add anything, Steve?
Yeah, Steve. Maybe Steve give us his perspective. Steve, we're
glad you're with us.
I just need to say one thing. I have only been here for about 6 weeks now. And Michelle said she's very glad that I'm here. There was one moment when she wasn't, and that's when I drove on the wrong side of the road, and it just happened, and I didn't think it was worth all the screaming because we just turned around. It was okay, but it was only a freeway entrance. Gee, what's the big deal?
Oh, my goodness.
But you're not alone in that. I think I've done that, and I've lived here my whole life and driven on the same side. So
great.
I'm with you there.
I won't feel so bad about it when it happens next time. So yeah, but we were, just to add to what Michelle has said, we were living in Melbourne with our children quite happily. I had served in some callings in the church, which I guess are considered high profile. Positions have never really mattered to me. I don't care where I serve. I want to try and do my best with it. And those callings finished, and then not much was happening. The business that I was involved with was beginning to grow, and we were getting quite settled and doing okay. And then this prompting opportunity, whichever way you want to call it, came up, and we decided to make that choice and go down that road. To me, life is very much like travelling on a road, and there are diversions that come along, and sometimes you have to move off that road. I'm not talking about the iron rod. I'm talking about just roads that we travel. And frankly, there are some interesting diversions we should take off those roads every now and again. Otherwise, we would miss out on some of the wonderful experiences that life has to offer. But even so, we need to continue travelling towards that goal. And for us, our goal has always been our family and the eternal nature of it. And then this opportunity to come to America came along. We did what we needed to do as far as government is involved. And Michelle and the boys were able to get together. Just as she pointed out, there were several instances where it was nothing but a miracle that certain things happened and they were then able to continue their journey along that road. And I'm pretty sure that other people may have just said, well, we weren't meant to go down here. We weren't meant to make this happen. But we continued with that long goal in mind. And the way we looked at it was that the road, this is still the road we need to travel. It's just got a bit rough right now. And maybe some roadworks need to happen, or maybe we just need to just divert a little bit, but we still need to continue down this road, which is what we did. And then the unfortunate thing that happened, as Michelle said, I came over. The idea was for us to just for me to go back and just settle up our affairs. And then COVID came along. The reaction from the local governments and our national governments in Australia was one of total lockdown, and they're still doing it today. And that's another issue in and of itself, but it prevented me from going back to see my wife and the two boys. And it was hard. And I couldn't believe what was happening, and it made me question the road that we were travelling. It sure did. And once or twice I even felt like saying, I thought, maybe I should just bring them home. But then things began to happen here that could not have happened anywhere else for my wife and for our two sons. And spiritually and in many other ways, they have benefited. Most importantly, spiritually, they've benefited from the opportunities that have happened. More miracles. I don't know how else to explain it, just more miracles. The chances of meeting certain people on the other side of the world where we don't live, where we don't know anybody, it's just too much to say that these things were just coincidences. And so we continued along that road, and I'm just grateful. I have tremendous respect for the pioneers and what they did, the early missionaries. They didn't have WhatsApp. They didn't have FaceTime. And those things helped my wife and I tremendously. We would spend an hour to 2 hours every day, didn't we, talking. Sometimes it wasn't easy. There were things that Michelle was facing, struggles, and I can't tell you how hard that was. Being a father and taking my role as a father seriously, and I couldn't do anything. I had to stand by and watch. It's hard to talk about it now, but I can honestly say I'm grateful for it because it has given me insights into some of the records of the church, what the early members went through, where they could do nothing but just watch on. And bottom line is it's given me, I feel, something of an insight into what it must be like for a Father in heaven, sometimes watching his children, those he cares about, and things happening. And because of their choices, there's nothing that really he can do about it. And I sort of use that in a qualified way, saying there's nothing he can do about it. But I guess we're here now. I'm very, very grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be with my wife and my boys. We've had more experiences in just the last few weeks than I care to talk about, to be honest, but some of those things are very special. I'm, as I said, very grateful for that technology. It enabled us to just stay connected for those 22 months. And we live in a world where it's a throwaway world, and that even goes as far as people's marriages are concerned. And I remember hearing a story years ago of an old couple that'd been married for forever, 60-something years. And the interviewer said, "How have you done that? How have you managed to last all that time in today's world?" And the old man got thoughtful and he said, back in my day when things were broken, we fixed them. And I think there's been a big change today. Everything seems to be throwaway. And the last thing I wanted to do was to throw away what we'd worked so hard to have. And we've enjoyed some blessings that we're now back together again, and we're travelling along that road in person with each other rather than via WhatsApp. Thank you, WhatsApp.
Thank you, WhatsApp.
Shout out for WhatsApp if you want to download it. Really helps.
That's really something it sounds like it was obviously a very unplanned. That would have been, because there was no way to really put things in place before you had the separation. And that's difficult. And you talked about talking a lot, but I'm just curious, are there any other rituals? My daughter just got married in January to a man who's in the Air Force. And so after only 4 months of marriage, he's already in his second deployment. And so he's in Turkey and she's here. And that's, what are your recommendations when things happen? I mean, theirs is planned. They got married knowing that in 4 months he would be taking off for 4 months period of time. I had a sister whose husband passed away suddenly, and that was one of those situations. It's obviously unplanned, and that was much more permanent. But what's your advice to couples that, have these separations or have things that are just out of the ordinary? Some of the rituals, some of the things you talked about. I'm just curious if there's any other specifics about how you kept things going.
I guess technology was the biggest thing, being able to speak to each other. Look, and the time zone was difficult.
Oh, yeah, that would be.
Depending on who had daylight savings, the time difference is anything between 16 to 18 hours. And so, sometimes we weren't contactable as easily as we wanted to be because of just time constraints, or, Steve was at work when it was convenient for me to talk, or it's late at night for me when it's convenient for him. So it was difficult. We utilized Zoom too, because we still have 2 daughters back in Australia. And so often for birthdays and Christmas, and we would have Zoom meetings, and so that we could all talk with each other and our son-in-law as well. And so technology was a big thing, but I think I tried to make sure that although I was here on my own and being far more independent than I'd ever had to be before. I was always independent, but this was on a different scale. Doing things that I had never done before, buying a car by myself, or, things like that I'd always let Steve do. I had other things to do, So, I did take on those roles that Steve had assumed over the years, and obviously I was still capable of doing it, and I did them, but I hadn't had to before. So took on a lot of roles, was the single parent, I guess, although he was contactable for the boys, but I was still physically the only parent, which to some degree I think they enjoyed, because the comment was made by our youngest when Dad was coming, "Does that mean I have to get things by 2 parents now?" Like, yes, you do, actually. The thing is he didn't quite realize that he was still getting things by 2 parents because we communicated. So I guess what I'm saying is, while I was super independent and I was assuming both roles, we still had that line of communication going all the time. And so probably 95% of things I would still run past Steve and we would talk about and discuss. And I know it was hard for him, listening to the things that we were doing or achieving or accomplishing, or struggles that we were going through. And he wasn't physically there, but he certainly was there on the other end of the phone and was just able to say the right thing at times. Sometimes he didn't say the right thing. That's life, But so many times he did just say the right thing, thing that I needed. So
we had some funny times too, didn't we? There was a time where our youngest son was flying back in from a school trip. He was arriving at the airport at local time here in Salt Lake about 11 o'clock at night, something like that. Yeah, I'm going to tell them about this.
My God.
And
Yeah, let's hear it.
And Michelle was driving the car out to the airport. It was a little bit of snow and cold, wasn't it? And it was late. And she got pulled over by two Utah police officers. Apparently, it's a little bit different the way you do registration here in Utah compared to how we do it in Australia. Michelle, without even knowing, was actually driving a car that wasn't registered. And so she got pulled over, and I get this phone call in Melbourne. I'm in my office there, in the engineering office there, and she said, "I've just been pulled over by two police officers." And I said, "Well, what for?" And she said, I don't know. They're just sitting in their car behind me." And I said, "Well, wait until they come out and talk to you." And she said, "Well, I'm going to keep my phone here." And I said, "No problems. If you need to, I can talk to them as well." And we heard this. I could hear this very polite officer in the background saying, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know your car's not registered?" And she said, I don't know. I don't understand why." And anyway, he said, "Well, look, we can fix it up right now." And she said, "Well, my husband's on the phone right now. We'll see if we can do it right now." And I said, "Yes, we could do that right now." And then couldn't resist it. I said, "Did you use the handcuffs on her? Did you use the cuffs on her?" And this police officer, he could hear this, and he said, "Well, no, we didn't." He laughed a little bit and said, "No, we didn't use the cuffs on her." And I said, "Well, I'll give you $50 if you taser her. Go on, $50. These two officers just laughed and laughed and laughed.
It was hilarious.
And my wife, I could hear my wife was yelling down the phone, "What are you doing? What are you saying?" And we were laughing and laughing back in Australia. It was the longest funny joke I've ever had. It was really great.
That's funny.
But,
Thanks, honey.
Thanks, honey.
And I'm really curious to know, so it's your situation is a little bit unique because you're together. You kind of have this idyllic family setting, and then it's thrust upon you that it's suddenly not, and it's like that for a lot longer than you thought. And then eventually you're able to come back. So each of you during that time period are able to see kind of some of the ways that it changed and some of the ways that it comes back. So I'm just curious to see, what are some of the things that you noticed? Did you appreciate the roles of each other? The role of her as a mother and the role of him as a father more as you kind of saw those roles disappear, and you have to assume some that he doesn't have, and he's realizing that he can't do the things that he wants to do. He can talk to you on the phone, but he's not there to be with you. So maybe what are some of the ways that each of you have come to appreciate the roles of a father and mother and how that's changed? If that makes sense.
The first thing that comes to mind actually is kind of funny, I guess. I need my sleep. And so in our family, always it's dad that has stayed up for the kids to come home when they've been out, as they're young single adults. Well, now there was no dad to stay up. So I had to stay up. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't like that very much, but and there were certain things that Steve has always been super helpful around the house. There's never been in our home, dad, earns the money, mum stays at home. I've always worked somewhat. It was, for me, that was important to have that as well as nurture my children. My children absolutely came first. But I wasn't just the housewife. And so Steve would very often cook dinner, and he would very often, more than he would have liked, done dishes and things like that. And so I found myself having to do all of that all of the time with the boys' help, but primarily, as the parent, it's you that's doing it. So I very much appreciated even more so all of those times that he had cooked dinner, all of those times that he had done the dishes or transported the kids to wherever they needed to be. Another thing that I really noticed missing was, although I had my sons who have the priesthood, at that time, neither of them had the Melchizedek priesthood. And so I missed having that and being able to call on Steve and say, I need a blessing, or we're not well, can we have an administration? And that role I couldn't take on. But fortunately, and I guess this comes into paragraph 7, is that at times, perhaps extended family, and when I say extended family, maybe they're not blood relations, but friends who become family, who can step in and function in that role. And so we can be benefits of the priesthood in that way. So I think it's interesting now, the adjustment, because I did take on extra roles, and I've got to be honest, I haven't let them go very easily since Steve's been back.
That was going to be my next question. Like, how are things now? I mean, did it change? Are you just going back to the way things were, or has it become?
No, I know. I've a lot of this I like. Like, I want the support. I want him here and let's do this together. But there's some of it that I'm not ready to let go. It's kind of interesting. I don't know that I expected that. I don't know about Steve, but he's been really supportive and said, look, I don't want you to lose any of that extra independence that you gained. So I'll let you do what you need to do and want to do, but I'm still here and we're still doing this together.
Isn't it amazing how the Lord really does fill in our capability when push comes to shove? I mean, It is just amazing how those capabilities and roles and everything can expand in a way that we just can't even imagine when the need isn't there, right?
Yeah,
but when the need comes, it's just exponentially we can be so much more capable and stronger and emotionally stable when that need is there, when we rely on the Spirit, when we rely on our Heavenly Father to get through these times that are not ideal, right?
100%. Yeah. If I had have known how this would have turned out, and if I had have known how long I would have been on my own with our sons for, if I had have known all the extra responsibilities and roles I would need to take on, I would not have believed that I could do it. And it probably would have caused me to say, no, I'm not doing it. And so it was probably very wise of Heavenly Father not to let us know in advance that this was how things were going to turn out, because I just couldn't imagine that I could do it. I still look back at the last close to 2 years and think, what? Like, I shake my head and think about the things that I've had to do and to tackle. Like, you would think coming from Australia to America, we all speak English. It's a different language. It really is. And so much is done differently, the
cultures.
Yeah.
Culture clash.
Yeah. And it just, even just, buying a car is different. Registering a car is different. The way insurance works is a little bit different. So all of these things that I've learned a lot.
I bet.
So it as I said at the beginning, it's been super, super hard, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. And we have been lucky in that we have had friends who've become family who were able to take on some of those roles and be the support that I physically needed. Very difficult for our extended family to be supportive in that way because, of course, they're all over in Australia as well. Interesting.
It's kind of been good too for me to step back, inadvertently pushed into that situation, but to step back and to see my, my wife and my children, my boys, step up into situations that if we had stayed put, they wouldn't ordinarily have had to face. And I'm a big believer in the potential of people to perform. I love that story or that saying where if you fall off a cliff, then the Lord will either teach you to fly or he'll catch you. And if you have enough faith in what you're doing, then that's exactly what he'll do. And he was there for my wife and for my boys. And at times they've flown, and at times he's caught them. And it's been an unusual situation because I'm a hands-on, get out there, get things done person. And to have to just stand there and operate by faith is it's a deeply personal, I don't know, how would you put it? It's almost an edgy place to be in at times when you have to make a decision as a parent, knowing that long term this is going to be good for you. And there were even times when, even for our relationship, for Michelle and my relationship, I could see that her being in some of those positions where she would have to stand up and do those things. As much as I wanted to do it for her, I couldn't. And so I had to trust that she would be okay and she would be looked after. And I have to say that she was more than looked after. In fact, I felt a little redundant at times in a nice kind of way. And that wonderful first week of being with Michelle and being back with this independent, forward-looking, strong woman who I always knew was there, has been one of the most gratifying moments in my life. I love my daughters. I have always said to them, be what you want to be, stand up for yourself. You have tremendous strength within you. And I say that to my sons as well. But when you're actually, it's really quite something to actually say and do those things, as opposed to just listening to them or even just reading about them. It's very different to actually being involved in the middle of those situations. And I initially, perhaps I wasn't quite as grateful as I should be. I am now. And I have a feeling there's more to come, Michelle.
I love how you both talked about, I mean, obviously you would have rather have been able to stay together and be a family. But it's amazing that you said that when you were thrust into that, the Lord just picked up the slack and made you who you needed to be and showed you the path that you needed to take. I think that's just an incredibly faith-building thing for me to see, and such an incredible example, really.
We were put in several situations where we had nothing left but to show faith. We couldn't do anything about it. No one else could do anything about it. It really just came down to faith and let God prevail and let Heavenly Father do what he needed or wanted, or, whatever was best for us. And that's a scary experience. But amazing at the same time. Like, I'm so grateful that I have had those experiences. Like, I don't even know how to describe it adequately. It literally is like you have nothing left. You have nothing left to give. You have nothing left you can do. And it's such a vulnerable place to be, especially as human beings. And obviously I'm a control freak. I don't want to give up some of these things that I've had to do for the last 2 years. And so to be put in that position where, you know what, girl, you got nothing left. You can't do anymore. You can't say anymore. and just literally hand it over and just let Heavenly Father do his thing has been so frightening, but so magical at the same time, and has been such a builder of faith. And I think that it's impacted our children. I think that they have seen that, and I hope it's been a good example for them to draw on later on.
And it hasn't just been, well, we'll exercise faith and then there's nothing left and then we get what we wanted. That isn't the way it works. Sometimes we've had to exercise faith and what we thought was the right answer didn't come. But then, do you know what? Later down the track, we accepted what had happened, we worked with it, and then later on down the road, track if you will, things fell into place that wouldn't have ordinarily happened.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of lessons here, even just for your family and for your children, on flexibility, learning to, I work in an environment where sometimes things change often, and I see people's reactions to all of a sudden something not going their way. And it's amazing the difference. And every once in a while I see these parents just say to their kids, well, it's going to be an extra long day today. We're going to do this. And I always tell them, thank you for teaching your children flexibility. And other ones throw a fit and they stomp, and you see their kids watching what they're doing. And there is something, your children are older, but I'm sure that there was an incredible amount of growth that they experienced here, an appreciation for family. But that life lesson, teaching them how to be flexible in extenuating circumstances, that'll be a gift. I think something that will bless their lives.
Yeah. Maybe what are some other things that you've seen? And you mentioned your children, that it was a great benefit for them to learn a lot of things. Maybe what are some of the things that you feel like they went through in some of these role changes and change ups and now coming back together?
Our oldest son so badly wanted to be here. And then when he got here, he struggled. He struggled to find his place here. Back home in Australia, where we're from, you're the only member of the church in your school generally. You're the only member of the church he's a basketballer, so he was the only member on his basketball team. He's the only one not swearing. He's the only one not drinking. He's the only one not doing lots of things. And he was comfortable in that role. He knew exactly who he was. And in fact, if he listens to this, he'll probably kill me. But his nickname was Mormon, for Mormon. And that's what he was known at his school, or known by at his school. And he loved it. He knew exactly who he was and what he needed to do and to be. And his role was very much defined. And so he gets here to Utah. Guess what? Just about every other kid is just like him.
A lot of Mormons running around here.
And so he struggled with that. He was like, well, who am I now? And that was hard to see him go through that. And I had to let him go through it. And he made some choices and decisions, and he's come out the other end and he's doing great. And he's an awesome kid. He's now 19, not a kid anymore. And, but I think that was a good thing for him to go through. I'm glad that he, had a very well-defined role before, and I'm glad he had to go through that struggle and to find his place in a new environment. Our youngest son, it was like for him at home, he couldn't find his place. It was very different. He couldn't find his place. He got here and in 5 seconds, he just was surrounded by his people, his tribe. And so that was a very different experience for the both of them. So that was interesting to watch.
So we've talked a lot about your boys, but you did say you have 2 older daughters. And just as a mother, how now they're half a world away. And how did you during this time keep that with them? And obviously when you left and you made the decision to come here, that was going to be something. Yeah. If they were staying there, that's going to be a longer term situation. How do you keep that? I mean, they're adults, right? But
yes.
That's still a very important part of the family. How do you keep those relationships strong in the distance?
And it has been an adjustment with that because right up until, well, just a little bit before we left and came here, all the kids were still at home. And, one daughter got married and she moved away, and that was an adjustment, but I still had the bulk of the kids at home with me. And so all of a sudden I have 2 with me and 2 away. And it really was difficult to get my head around that. I really am like this mother hen, and I want to keep them close. And of course they're not physically close. What I had to realize too was that my girls were adults, and our relationship had to change, and it had been changing, for good, but it certainly changed again with having that physical distance as well. And so I wasn't in their lives in the day-to-day stuff as much, but we've certainly Zoomed or texted or called. And so we still talk as if no time has passed. But I have had to let go a little bit and just remember that they are adults and they're making their own way and their own decisions. And I think I'm more of a resource now. Like, the role has changed.
It's sometimes it's not easy transitioning from, a parent who tells your kids what to do just about every second of the day, into that older equal.
That's the truth.
An older equal.
Yes.
And that's not easy sometimes for parents, let alone for the kids as well. So I think that's where we've headed towards, isn't it? And the girls feel much more comfortable. I mean, they're married, another one's on the way to married, and they're making their own decisions. They're running businesses. They're doing all of those things and succeeding out there in the world. And, of course, we have a little bit more time experience and things, and moving into that role. I think if you work on it, involves some stepping back and learning to discuss things rather than, no, you should be doing this type of reaction, seems to work very well.
I think the key word has been listen.
I liked how you said you're also more of a resource, and I do think that's part of it, is cutting those strings, cutting those apron strings. It's tough. I have 5 adult children, and we've had 2 weddings this year, and watching them move into that. And, just the other night, my daughter called because she wasn't feeling well. The one is newly married, and my mother was at my mom's house, and she said, see, they still need you. And it's true. They do. They need you for that comfort. But I mean, her husband was perfectly capable of going out and getting her what she needed for whatever was ailing her and giving her comfort. And we all still need our moms. But you're right. I think a lot of it comes down to listening and being that resource. Hey, and then right after that, a son called, hey, Mom, do you have this recipe for whatever that we used to make growing up? And it's, I do enjoy those calls, I'm sure, as you do. Yeah. But it's also, isn't it just so rewarding to see them being independent? And that was also kind of forced with the distance too, right? Not to be able to have them physically close.
Definitely.
Another question that I have, I just am really curious about this. So initially, when you became separated and realized that it was going to be a longer term sort of a thing, maybe you, Steve, and you, Michelle, what are some things what are some roles that you saw that initially kind of scared you because you knew that role was kind of better suited for the other person, but now you were going to have to take it on? Was there any roles that you felt like, Steve is going to definitely be better at that, but I'm going to have to fulfill it. Or you, Steve, even, being there with your daughters, is what just left? What just took off from Australia?
You hit it in one. I from a family of, I have 8 brothers, and we're in a hospital, Michelle and I, and in comes this little pink blanket. And I got to be honest, I said, what do I do with that? I didn't know. I truly, honestly didn't know. I sat there cradling this little baby girl, and Michelle's asleep. And I guess I thought all of the thoughts that a new father begins to think about the daughter that they're holding and how they want to protect her and how they want to be what they can be for her. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time with my daughters, and we've ridden horses together, and we learned to ride bikes, and all of the stuff that you just do as a kid. It doesn't matter if they're a boy or a girl. And then my daughter got married. One of our daughters got married, and there was a dance in the reception where it was a daddy-daughter dance. And I danced with my daughter, and I was enjoying the company with her. And then I realized that the song was about a father giving away his daughter to her new husband. And then the song finished, and my daughter said, "Thanks, Dad," and kissed me. And she turned away, and her hand slipped out of my hand, and I felt this real tug as she walked away to her husband. And I suddenly realized that there is a bond and a connection between fathers and daughters. And so there I was in Australia, just me with my daughters, and I kept in contact with them. And I just tried to be the friend that I've always tried to be with them, and tried to be that older equal, if you like, with them. And we still tried to go bike riding together, and we still tried to do all of those things that we did as kids. We laugh about some of the stories that I read to them when they were younger. And you know what? I think I'll still keep doing that even when they're 50 years old. And touch wood, if I'm still alive when they're 60 years old or 70 years old. And I think those sorts of things are very important for dads and their daughters. With my sons, I just said to them, look after your mother. Always look after your mother. And I think at times they forgot that. Sons and dishes don't really mix so good. And for instance, but by and large, I think they really did try to respect their mother, and they've tried to look after her. And it's at a distance, it wasn't easy, but I hoped that I'd had enough of an impact, example-wise, before we were separated for it to influence their lives after that.
Wow.
It was difficult, I think, to fill both roles. A mother's role is very different to a father's role, and so it should be. And I think that they work hand in hand and complement each other. There were things that I just couldn't be for my boys. As they advanced through the priesthood, as they were turning into men, I'm their mum. And I think that there were several conversations that they needed to have with Dad, and they couldn't have that with me in the same way. I mean, we certainly did have conversations, and I do appreciate the opportunity that I had to grow closer to them. I think I have a closer bond with them because of the experience that we've been through. But there were certainly things that Steve needed to be there for and to do and take care of. And our oldest son, is 19, and we're just he's not far off a mission. And that was where I was kind of like, Steve, you have to get here. And that was another miracle, him getting here. You just have to. I feel like I'm at my limit. I can't send our son on a mission by myself. And I needed Steve here to do that with me. He needed to help Riley prepare for his mission in a way that I couldn't. I hadn't served a mission. Steve had. And so then there's a bond, I think, there between someone who served, someone who was about to serve. There's an understanding there that I just couldn't have. And so, yeah, look, I think that for the most part we did well balancing the new roles and taking them on, and we did a pretty good job. But at the end of the day, there were still things that I couldn't take on, that Steve, he was needed. And so now it feels, even though we're adjusting, it feels complete now there are the things that he was unable to take on before, now he can. And yeah, I just think mum and dad together are so important. I didn't grow up that way. My parents separated and divorced when I was 4 years old. My mum remarried again when I was 9. By the time I was 16, my stepfather was gone. He was abusive. Like, there's just this whole story. And so I haven't known what it's like to have the priesthood in my home. And so I've always appreciated that Steve has been there, and he has always honored his priesthood. He has never for 1 second exercised unrighteous dominion. I think if he had it, I would have been out the door, given my experiences as I grew up. But I just appreciate it so much, and I see just how much it's needed because I didn't have it. And of course, my mom did the best that she could, and did it well. But those roles are important. And they complement. I can't stress enough how much I believe that they complement each other. Never once have I ever felt less than because I'm not a male, because I'm a female, or because I don't have the priesthood, my husband does. Never once. I know that some do, but I just haven't, and I'm so grateful for that, because I truly believe that one can't function without the other. We've had an interesting experience where we've had to function like that, and there have been benefits, but there have been drawbacks. Luckily for us in this situation, Heavenly Father has carried us and has picked up the shortfall, and other people around us have been inspired to help us and help pick up that shortfall. But at the end of the day, nothing compares to having both mum and dad there as far as it's humanly possible.
Thank you so much for sharing. Very personal, touching. This has been a difficult time for you. We just appreciate you sharing that with us and our listeners. There's so many variations on and adaptations that families have to make for a myriad of reasons. And I think you've just given us a lot of food for thought on how to handle those things as best as possible and rely on the Savior and the Spirit and each other, even in the miles.
And cry a lot.
And it's okay,
I can tell you that some habits die hard. We're used to talking by WhatsApp. I was in the kitchen last night, and my phone went off, and it was Michelle. Could you bring me a drink of water, please?
And WhatsApp.
On WhatsApp.
Well, you couldn't do that before, so.
That's amazing.
That's great.
Oh, well, we're glad you were here to take her the water. So I'm sure she's super grateful to have you back.
Very much.
But thanks so much for taking so much time and to spend with us and for sharing some of those very personal experiences. And I know that I've been uplifted many times in the last hour. So we're super grateful for you. So thanks so much for that time. And I'm just going to read that portion of the paragraph that we read at the beginning after having talked about some of these experiences. So it's paragraph 7. By divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. In these sacred responsibilities, fathers and mothers are obligated to help one another as equal partners. Disability, death, or other circumstances like moving from Australia, they should have put that in there, because that's, may necessitate individual adaptation. Extended families should lend support when needed. So thanks so much for sharing those experiences with us, and we're so grateful to have had the opportunity to meet you too. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Raising Family podcast. This episode was produced by Carol Rice. Our research coordinator is Angela Falentine. Audio was edited and mixed by John Wright. The Raising Family podcast is brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org.